Welcome everybody. We are really excited to have you all on this webinar. Today we are going to discuss performance insights in Supplier One. My name is Danielle Gloy. I will be monitoring the chat today, and then leading us through the content is Ali Trong, Supplier Wiki's research manager. So just a little bit about Supplier Wiki. Here at Supplier Wiki, we create free educational content with the main goal of setting suppliers like you up for success. So we do this in a lot of different ways. For example, through like the webinar you're on today, we also have free ebooks that you can download and articles that you can read. They are all available on our website. I will probably be sending through a couple of our resources in the chat throughout the webinar. So if you are interested, those will be available to you. So moving on to the agenda, we're going to start off doing an overview on what Supplier One is, what its main features are, and just how they may impact you. Then we will do a deep dive into the performance insights platform that Supplier One offers and how you can leverage some of its features. From there, we will move into managing returns in Supplier One, and then we will wrap up the webinar with a live Q&A session with Ali and myself. So lots of good content to cover today. All right, so here are a few FAQs that we typically get during webinars. So the first being, will we be getting a copy of the slide deck? Yes, absolutely. So we will send a copy of the slide deck in PDF format, as well as the recording of this webinar, and that should appear in your email inbox in about 3 to 4 business days. And then the second question that we often get is, what is the best way to ask a question? So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a chat tab and then a Q&A tab. So the chat tab is going to be a great place to engage with the group or just to share any insights or helpful information. And then the best way to submit a questions is through that Q&A tab. So I'll be able to monitor those more easily and then tee them up for Ali for the Q&A time at the end. Okay, so last thing before we get into the content, we are SupplyPike. I introduced you to Supplier Wiki earlier. Supplier Wiki is just a part within SupplyPike. SupplyPike is actually a platform that helps suppliers get paid and get better. So this is done with a software that identifies, recovers, and prevents deductions and compliance issues. So we do this with a couple of different retailers. Today we are going to be talking about Walmart, but we also have solutions for Amazon, Target, Kroger, Home Depot. We also have CVS. The list just continues to grow. And just a little shout out, we work with a lot of awesome suppliers. We have some of them up here on the slide today. And if you aren't currently working with us, we would love to see your brand's logo up here in the future. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ali to get into today's content.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. Excited to get into today's content. If this is your first time joining us on a Supplier One webinar, welcome. We've been doing these pretty regularly to keep up with some of the updates and just level set whenever a new application or platform comes into a retailer ecosystem. There can be struggles to keep up with the updates or understand the best ways to use it. So we're going to walk through some of that in level set today. And we'll start with just defining what Supplier One is and how suppliers can use it. So if you're, getting on this webinar because you realize there's a whole other platform you're supposed to be using, it's called Supplier One, we'll start off here. Essentially, Supplier One is a streamlined platform of some of the features that were in Retail Link, and we'll reference some of the older apps if you have used those before. But if you're using it as a supplier, it's really the place where suppliers can take action or get quick glances and make decisions. And that seems to be the intent that Walmart has for that. Some of the language that they've used is to streamline some of their more siloed features, make them more connected, and introduce a universal system of prioritization for supplier action. So this year, Walmart announced in Q2 that Supplier One would be replacing Item 360. That has been the most major update within the app, that Item 360 is not something you are supposed to be using anymore. If you've heard something different from your replenishment teams or your buyers, refer to that. But the widespread documentation is that Item 360 is no longer used. So you should have already transferred over your item setup or new products into Supplier One. And I'll pause here. Please engage in the chat. If you want to share your experience with Supplier One, a cool feature that you've used, something that's been helpful, or something that you haven't been able to figure out, please share that in the chat. I'll engage with those if they're relevant to the discussion we're having within the slides, but I'll also go through those during the Q&A as well, just to make sure that we're learning from one another. All right. So a common misconception with Supplier One that we've seen some suppliers have issues is I'm logged into Retail Link, but how do I get to Supplier One? So essentially, it is a secondary platform, but it is connected to Retail Link and some of the Retail Link apps, but you use a separate login for Supplier One. And that URL is actually in a lot of their documentation. So if you've never used it, we can send that to you. It's really easy to find in their help documents as well. But as it stands, Retail Link is the current supplier platform with Walmart. Supplier One is not replacing Retail Link, although it is having some overlap with the functionality and the application within Retail Link. Item 360 is being replaced by Supplier One. So important to mention there. And Supplier One is covering a lot of breadth when it comes to supplier action. Today, we're going to cover returns and we're going to cover the item setup because those are the most built out parts of the platform, but there are some updates that you may have not seen before. So I encourage you to log in to your Supplier One account and kind of go through that and see if there's anything that's new to you that we can discuss today. All right, so what are some of the main features within Supplier One? First is order management. It's similar to Nova functionality, and I will pause here and say in the Walmart documentation, and I have it pulled up here just because I like to have the actual words that Walmart said. They have in their FAQs, will Supplier One eventually be used instead of Nova? And what it says directly is that suppliers will continue to use Nova functionality at this time. So they aren't exactly apples to apples. I can get into that in a different webinar. We actually have one that Supplier One webinar that covers order management more clearly. Today we're focusing on items and inventory, as well as some of the returns reporting. So I would still use Nova. That's what Walmart is telling you to do. The Supplier One order management functionality is not built out to the same use as Nova is currently. So still keep using Nova. But that's not what we're going to focus on as much today unless people have specific questions. And then items and inventory is the second feature within Supplier One. And from the use cases that we've seen or talked to other suppliers, it is essentially a duplicate of Item 360 functionality. It feels very similar. There may be some changes in the web design or the UX, but ultimately it feels very similar. And then there's the payments and deductions data and info. And if you have your Supplier One portal pulled up, you can see if you click into that it's under payments. It's not completely built out. It's some reporting, and it mostly has invoices, allowance, and then receiving deductions. So we won't be going into that today, but if you do have questions, we can talk through that. Again, it's much more high-level reporting. And then under reports is going to be your returns reporting, scorecard analysis, and I'll kind of I'm reading, that's the performance. Consolidated reports in one place. Essentially, if you're familiar with your OTIF scorecard, your SQEP scorecard, some of the scorecards that live in Retail Link, it is a high-level dashboard, I'll show you here in a second, that shows you the most important metrics from all of those reports so you have one view of how am I performing in these certain areas when it comes to my content quality, my OTIF scores, my SQEP scores. I believe there's a report on ASN data. It's all consolidated, and then you can click into the more detailed scorecards. So we won't, again, be talking about that much today, but we can talk through uses or questions that anyone has. And then if we follow the performance, that's going to be where returns reporting is under, trends. There are some scorecard analysis in there as well that we can talk through. And then demand and forecast makes sense. Pretty similar to some of the other features within Retail Link. Two ones that we don't have here that are relatively new is apps and integrations. So additional apps that you can add to Supplier One, and then growth opportunities, which you can go into and click through yourself. Essentially, it is two ads, one for Luminate, one for Walmart Connect. And then there's another one with a program that we're just not familiar with yet, but it's essentially review accelerator. So making sure that your items get reviewed at a faster pace. So if anybody has used the review accelerator, we'd love to talk through it here. Again, it's relatively new, so we don't have any coverage on that today. All right, let's do a deep dive into the scorecard. So we went through all of the features within Supplier One. Under Performance, you'll click Scorecard, and there's also Return Trends, which we'll be going into today. But essentially, the scorecard is the content quality, like I mentioned before, on time and in full performance, and then PO accuracy. And here's a look at what you would see if you were logged in. One thing I'll mention before I kind of get into the different parameters is your supplier ID. That's going to be really important if you have multiple supplier IDs to make sure that you're viewing the correct information. At this level, you can pull all supplier IDs to get an aggregate of those scores and what you're scoring at against the target score. But if you're looking to drill down into a specific part of your business, you want to filter down with that. So the metrics that they have in here is in full, on time, collect ready, and then content quality. And depending on what type of business you have, you may not have, you may do completely prepaid or completely collect when it comes to your shipping. So you may not see some of these parameters, but we tried to get an example that has everything, because some suppliers do use both prepaid and collect. So these are the metrics that you have access to at this view and what they currently have in the app. And like I mentioned before, if you click these review reports, I have a slide on it, but I just kind of want to walk through it at a high level, and I'll reiterate. That will take you for this one in full, it's going to take you to the OTIF scorecard. So it'll take you to the correlating scorecards that match up from Retail Link. So you can see how Supplier One is connected within the Retail Link ecosystem. All right, and if this is completely new to you, and you don't know what these metrics are, we have a lot of resources on this, and I'll touch on this briefly. Again, we have webinars, ebooks, articles on time and in full and what it means at Walmart and how you can navigate that, how you can avoid fines, and how you can end up disputing them and getting those won back. But essentially, on time means that you are delivering the right quality, so that in full part, the right amount, the correct product on time to either the DC, or you're making sure that those POs are ready for carrier pickup and they are on the time and date that they're expected to be picked up. And so if you haven't been aware, in 2024, there have been changes to that. So those goals have updated. They've decreased a little bit. They're still in that 90% range, but there is less of an expectation to hit up to 90% or 95% for some of those on time in full goals. So that should be reflected in Supplier One as well. And then I kind of already alluded to what it means to be in full, but that's making sure that whatever it says on the PO, if it says I need 10 apple juice boxes, that you are fulfilling that PO order. You're not giving them 9 apple juice boxes. You're not giving them 10 orange juice boxes. You are doing exactly what is expected on the order. And then one that we get a lot of questions about, we cover OTIF, we cover SQEP, we understand those, but what is content quality? And you can actually go into that report and view where it's coming from in Supplier One, but it's essentially referring to the item catalog data. So making sure that you have the correct information, that if someone's clicking onto your product, they can understand what's happening so they can then make a decision to buy your product. And that has several elements like having the correct product name, having high quality images that help a consumer look at your product, understand the use cases and the benefits. What affects the content quality score? And this is broken down in some of the help articles that Supplier One has, and you can access that on the platform. But there are two main components. So I kind of talked through this already. This is Walmart's exact language. So this is kind of the easiest way to digest that. So making sure you have essential elements like product name, site description, key features, images. Those are not optional. They are the must-haves. That's what helps shoppers understand what product that you have. And then required or recommended attributes. So that's going to increase your score because those may be nice to haves, but they may be the difference between someone being interested in your product versus not. And these are going to cover the necessary or can be required depending on how they're being used or what category you're in that can enhance a product listing. And then here's how your content score is measured. So there's good, there's average, and there's poor. There's 3 buckets, and then they aggregate those into one score. So for this example, supplier A has 123 good items. Their scores are breaking down in that good category. Most of their items are in that average range, which means they probably could go add some attributes or some additional information to just boost that score. And then they have 218 items that are in that poor category. And these items are going to be difficult to find or lack necessary content to perform well in search engines or with SEO. So that makes sense. And if this is something that your team is seeing and you have a lot more yellow and orange than you have green when it comes to your content quality breakdown, you can use the help documents that Walmart has. You can go through and make an action plan and say, hey, we're going to tackle, everything that's poor and get that up into average. That's going to boost our score, or let's work on average and getting more into that good category. However you decide to do that, it may take working with a particular team, whether that's your marketing team or your content analyst or someone who's working on managing all the content that goes into your content score and your digital presence. We do have 3 webinars that we did with One World Sync. They literally do that for a living. They help suppliers with content syndication and increasing their quality score. So if you want to hear how they help not just Walmart suppliers, but basically every supplier under the sun, you can go check out those webinars too. And Danielle will send those in the chat. Okay, like I mentioned, we're kind of coming back from, we went deep into content quality, making sure that we defined on time and in full. What about these buttons? What happens when I click these buttons? It's going to take you to those particular reports in Retail Link. So, ta-da! This is what this is the on time and in full OTIF scorecard in Retail Link. So we're pretending like we clicked through on that, and it would take you directly to this report. And this is just going to give you the more detailed version of what's happening so you can understand what cases are compliant, what are non-compliant. And if you haven't spent any time in the OTIF scorecard, we have plenty of content on that as well, understanding how you can get into some of the root cause of what's happening with whether it's a particular item or a particular DC that's creating some more of these issues. You can kind of get into the trend analysis and performance that's happening. So won't spend too much time here, but you can access this without going through Supplier One. You just go to Retail Link, type in OTIF scorecard or SQEP scorecard, and you can find these reports without having to go in Supplier One. Some notable features, if you haven't used it, that we want to just clarify is toggling between performance and charges. So you can see an overview of your charges. However, you can't dispute in the OTIF scorecard. You actually dispute in High Radius. And if that's another platform that you haven't heard of, no worries. We have content on that too that you can go learn a little bit more about how to dispute those charges. What's really cool, and I actually love this feature in the OTIF scorecard, is you can filter from here to go to SQEP, ASN, FMP, and then CARS as well. And then again, using reports, this is pretty standard, but being able to see the different periods is helpful, especially when you're going back and disputing charges because Walmart OTIF charges are on I believe it's moved to a quarterly basis now. It's easier to see at that larger level what happened, dig into the data, and then use this as proof documentation when you're disputing OTIF charges. Okay, we're not on the navigation bar for Supplier One. This is the navigation bar for the OTIF scorecard. So imagine this navigation bar is here. You have a summary of the downloaded report, you have PO details, and then the common compliance view, which is essentially just consolidated metrics. It's another overview, another way to look at the data. So again, won't spend a ton of time here, but a very helpful resource, especially when going into root cause and digging into disputing your OTIF charges. And then this is key for any Walmart platform that you use. It's making sure you're filtering correctly, using these filters, because there's a lot of data that's being aggregated in to get in and understand what's happening, filtering at the 6 or 9-digit supplier number, depending on how your business is set up and if you have additional BUs. Vendor pool ID, DC number, especially if you've identified something like, okay, all my prepaid POs that are going to this DC are having issues. This is a great way to use the filter and then pull that information and start your disputing process. Okay, so we've moved off of our scorecards and now we're going on to return trends. So we'll revisit our side nav from Supplier One. And we're going into performance. We just did scorecard, and now we're in return trends. And this is going to be an overview of the claims and returns scorecard. It's going to provide some of the detailed information for tracking claims and returns activities. I'm not familiar with an application that was used primarily before this. So if you guys have one that's a legacy in Retail Link, let us know. But there wasn't an easy way to track all of this information. You had to kind of pull from different pieces or specific like return scorecard, or DSS, honestly, was something that was used for a lot. So this is what the claims and return scorecard looks like. It provides high-level insights and trends for customer returns, and it's going to be broken down by gross merchandise value and then units. So you can see here, this is again just like high-level metrics, thinking about the period you're filtering for, and then the ID type or UPC ID can be helpful, especially when disputing things at line or item level. One thing I want to pause here and talk about is item setup, because item setup navigated from item 360 to Supplier One under the items in inventory. We haven't seen, thankfully, too many issues with that transfer, but going through and doing an audit of your catalog can help reduce fines, deductions that you're seeing at an item level if things did not transfer over correctly. If you've seen issues like that with this transfer, or even just had item setup issues in the past that have affected you down the line in deductions or fines, this is a really key and easy way to understand if there's something happening by pulling some of that return information. You can see it in other reports as well, but that's a new use for this one that we've seen some suppliers have success understanding their data better. So some of the notable features, again, selecting a date range. So there have been instances in the past with suppliers who all of a sudden there's a ton of returns in this one like 3 or 4 week period, realize an item is set up incorrectly and are able to make that change or update the item information to reflect the accuracy of the product. So this is an easy way to understand what's happening in a time frame and going back to that historical data. And so you can see you can get last month up to the last 6 months, which is pretty valuable in terms of the longevity that Walmart will hold your data at this level. So other things you can use is searching for items. So UPC ID, your item ID, or your Walmart item number or WIN can be selected from the drop-down menu. And then you can copy and paste those into the search bar, and you can have multiple IDs in there, which is nice that you can pull up multiple items at once. So one thing that some users haven't realized you can do is use that with commas. And then again, we're going to go back to making sure that you're using the filters. This can really narrow down to the particular item that you're looking for or a subset of items. And you can do that with very similar filters that we had before. Notable, department, category, buyer ID, and then merch alignment are different from the other filter we were looking at. And then if you were on that page for the returns scorecard, you'll scroll down. So I'll just go back. We were here, look at return reasons. You scroll down, you get this little pie chart, and you can see the aggregate of different reasons why customers are returning those under that reason code. This can also help with if you're looking at disputing returns or making sure your return allowances are applying correctly. You can use this data as well. So you can see some of the return reasons under here. Most of them are changed mind, some are damaged, poor quality, didn't meet expectations, does not work, or incorrect or missing items. These all have a particular code that are attached to them when it comes to AP deductions that you may be facing. And these may be helpful for making sure you're searching by item ID, that your return allowances are applied, or that the correct return process that is outlined in your supplier agreement is being used so that you're not being charged additional fees because your merchandise is being handled in a way that you haven't agreed to within your supplier agreement. So again, I've gone through these. We love to hear from you guys if you want to share some of the common reasons that you're seeing returns. Again, a great place to pause and see, hey, am I having an issue with my manufacturing? We're seeing a lot of defective parts or poor quality. Or is my item set up, some of the information I have on Walmart.com or the marketplace incorrect, and it's making consumers think that they're getting something else that really our product is not serving that purpose. So another great way to kind of dig into that data and tackle return issues. So again, we're back at the top of the returns dashboard, and you can see that you can toggle between custom returns, claims, and then trends. So you can click on that claims tab and you can get your claim status. So this is going to focus on allowances versus claims, your claim stats, and then claim reasons. And this provides a high-level overview of that claim data compared to your previous period, so you can see where you're on track. Again, this is going to be super helpful when understanding how your allowances are being applied and making sure that those are applied correctly so you're not losing out on what you've agreed upon in your returns allowances. You can also see claim reasons, and this is going to be broken down by reason code, which is really nice. You can see these are the claim reasons. They don't have the number particularly attached here, but we can go through that as well. Those all have code numbers that may come through APIS, so I can explain that in further detail if needed. But you can see you've got handling fees, you have a defective merchandise, and then damaged merchandise that's unable to be used. So this table is going to show that total claims, units, dollars, and then the percentage comparison to last year, which is really cool to see how you're performing compared to last year. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, you can see the allowances versus claims graph that shows how each claim in each department compares to their allowances. So another great way to make sure that you're on track. That like yellowy mustard, burnt gold is what we have here, represents claims during that selected time frame. And then the blue bar is going to show how those allowances are collected. And like I mentioned, here are some of the allowance deduction codes. Typically, you're going to see them in that 50 range. They do have some that are in, code 151 and then code 10 here at the end. But if you see a code that's in the 50s, it's likely an allowance deduction. We have a whole webinar on that. We have articles on that. We have ebooks on that. So Danielle will send those through. We won't cover those in too much detail today, but these are going to be tied in and are a great thing to have is pulling up your returns claims, your supplier contract with Walmart, and making sure that those are being applied correctly and that it's tracking on progress with that. And then another thing we wanted to mention is if you're just taking that data, what's the next action steps you can do is thinking through if your supplier agreement says that your product, if it's returned or damaged, how it interacts with return centers. And return center disputes are going to be very different than other disputes, and you're actually not able to dispute them through APDP, so the AP dispute portal. You have to download all those reports and backup details, your documentation, and fill out a defective merchandise handling fee and RTV freight claim form. So if you're not familiar with that, we do have a whole webinar on returns, but it's important to talk through how you can actually make that data actionable and the steps you can take. So if you are seeing a lot of return claims through that center and you're wanting to dispute them, don't bang your head against your computer and try to dispute them in APDP. It will not work. It will direct you to dispute them with the return center in particular. So you'll fill out that form with claim number, invoice date, the amount that you're disputing, the reason for dispute, and then including any documentation. And you'll create a case with partner support. So we have the way that you do that within partners support. You go to returns chargebacks, go through defective merchandise, and then you'll submit it there. So I haven't heard anything particularly on how fast they are to dispute, but I have heard suppliers in the past that have worked with a return center do feel like because those that are reviewing those claims work directly in the return center and have familiarity with those particular types of disputes, they usually make sense and are a little bit more explained or thought through because of the nature of working in the return center and understanding return disputes in particular. So that is kind of a hopeful part of that. All right, now we're going to get into tips, strategies to navigating your performance insight. So like I mentioned before, leveraging those time frame comparisons, especially if you're able to line them up to your dispute data. If you have someone who's disputing deductions or OTIF fines at your company, making sure that they have access to this and that they're able to line up those dispute timeframes so they have something marked in their calendar to then go review this, see if any of this data is helpful to disputing any particular claims that have come through, and then applying that in their dispute process, whether that's an APDP, whether that's in high radius, whether it needs to happen with the return center claims. Second is making the most of the filters. So this is a tip we've heard from users of Supplier One is these filters are much more helpful. They allow you to drill down because if you're pulling up everything, it really becomes overwhelming, and it can depend on, let's say you're pulling, item data and you're seeing one item is performing really poorly, whether that's content quality or it's just never on time or it doesn't perform well in a DC. This is a great way to dice that data and understand, okay, I need to focus on this particular item. I need to understand the returns that are happening here. So then I can go do some more root cause analysis and take action on, okay, I need to update my labels. There's something incorrect with my labels, or the information that we've given to this DC in the receiving process makes it really hard for them to understand. Maybe it's back to the label and they're having trouble scanning it. So this data can be actionable in that way as well. And then I will harp on this all day. I feel like from the suppliers I've talked to, when it comes to Supplier One, there's the most amount of resources that we've seen with a particular platform, with Walmart, even compared to Retail Link. The chat is pretty helpful. We've seen some success come from that. You can manage your tickets here. So if you're having issues within this particular platform, like your data is not showing up correctly or something's happening, you can do that there. But really, I think the crown jewel here is those search articles. So Supplier One does have probably the most extensive documentation for their features and what's happening. You can even see the updates that are coming through. So what's going to be launched, either it's newly launched or coming down the pipeline. So be sure to look at that. Okay, I zoomed through that, but we're going to go ahead and get into our Q&A if we have any. If not,
Yes.
I'll wait for you. Okay, cool.
Well, we don't have any questions, but I'm just going to give it a little bit more time. And in the meantime, call out some of our resources. I know I have sent an overwhelming amount in the chat, but they are all available on our websites. These are specifically ebooks that we've done that are Walmart focused. We also have topics across other different retailers if you are interested. A resource that we recently released is next year's fiscal calendar for Walmart. So it includes US and international holidays and the full 454 breakdown of Walmart weeks. I will go ahead and send that link in the chat if you are interested. But it doesn't look like we had any other questions come in. If you think of a question later or would like to share any insight, please feel free to reach out to us on our email, or you can find us at supplypike.com. We would love to continue that conversation with you. But that is all that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully we will see you on the next webinar.
Yep. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you guys for joining. Again, if you have any questions about Supplier One, if you would like us to do a deep dive on a particular feature or part of the side nav, let us know. But until then, we hope to see you at another webinar.